Welcome everyone to week 2 of EPM 4355, ISO 14001 Environmental Management Systems. This week we're going to talk a little bit about leadership. We go back to our systems diagram, our Plan, Do, Check, Act framework, and the clauses of ISO 14001. Last week we covered some of the issues that help ISO 14001 structure an organization as an open system. We see that the coverage of internal and external issues, the needs and expectations of interested parties, and the scope of the environmental management system establish the context. Once we've done that, we go back to the center of the EMS, which is leadership. In this presentation, we're going to talk about some key definitions related to leadership, the role of organizational leaders, 14001 environmental leadership and commitment requirements, the environmental policy requirements, and roles, responsibility, and authorities requirements from the standard. As usual, we're going to begin with some definitions so that we understand what we are talking about. As you'll learn, the ISO definitions are not always what you understand these terms to mean, but they are what the terms mean in the context of the international standards. So it's important to understand exactly what each term means and then how it's used within the standard. The first term is environmental policy. And this is two aspects to this. It is the intentions and the direction of an organization related to its environmental performance as formally expressed by its top management. So there's two components to a policy. It must provide specific direction, and it has to reflect the intentions, the why, sort of the purpose of the environmental performance of the organization. It's the reason that the EMS exists. The definition of organization is a person or group of people that has its own functions with responsibilities, authorities, and relationships to achieve its objectives. Organizations come in many flavors. As ISO acknowledges, they include, but they're not limited to, sole trader, company, corporation, firm, enterprise, authority, partnership, charity, institution, non-governmental organizations, in part or combination, whether incorporated or not, public or private. So really the term organization is very broad. It includes about every type of organization you can imagine. Top management is defined as a person or group of people who directs and controls an organization at the highest level. In most organizations, this is what we would consider to be the leadership, because top management has the power to delegate authority, provide resources. And then if this is an interesting note, note 2, because if the scope of the management system covers only part of an organization, then top management refers to those who direct and control that part of the organization. The idea is that the top management is considered all of the individuals who can delegate authority, provide resources, direct the organization in a particular path, and control the operations. Interested parties are persons or organizations that can be affected, be affected by or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activity. So the key here is the word affect. They can, and as we saw in our systems diagram earlier, this is in the realm of influence. Influence works both ways. So the person or organization can affect the EMS, can be affected by the EMS, or even just perceive itself to be affected by. So we're dealing with both measurable influence as well as perceptions of influence. Some examples of interested parties are customers and communities, suppliers, regulators, non-governmental organizations, investors, and employees. This is interesting on note 1 because to perceive itself to be affected means that the perception has been made known to the organization. The perception doesn't exist unless the organization knows about it. You can't just assume that you are affected by something that this organization is doing, and that's your perception. But because that perception doesn't exist in the eyes of the organization unless you make it known to them. So what is the role of organizational leaders? Well, there's a couple of them. They act as an anchor for the EMS. They center it in a set of principles and guidelines. The leaders have ultimate accountability for development and effectiveness of the different elements of the EMS and for the EMS itself. Again, this is most of the time relegated to top management because these are the individuals, or the executive managers have responsibility and authority for organizational resources, and they can direct the path of the organization for development of the EMS. The organizational leaders have to model commitment to environmental responsibility. This is part of what they need to do because people are looking to them to set the tone for behaviors as well as set the tone for organizational culture. Organizational leaders also make sure that each element of the EMS is developed sufficiently and aligned with the other elements so that they work together. This is a balancing act. The leaders need to make sure that the processes have adequate resources, they've been implemented properly, and they're achieving what they're supposed to achieve, but not just in isolation. The key here is that leaders understand the big picture and they make sure all the components of the EMS work together. One big change with the 2015 revision is that with the inclusion of leadership, the EMS is now linked to core organizational strategy. It is be part of the business. It can no longer be a middle management add-on or just a tool set. It has to be part of how the business is operated. This is a major change because the complaint was that you could do ISO 14001 environmental management systems. They would be a set of tools, but they really wouldn't affect how the organization was run or its purpose or its direction. That's no longer true. Because of the responsibilities of leaders, and EMS is now linked to the core organizational strategy. Again, we can see this just from the graphic where we show the clauses of 14001. We see leadership in the center of the diagram. And there's a reason for this, because leadership is developing, coordinating the planning, support and operation, performance evaluation, and improvement of the EMS based on the internal resources as well as the context of the organization. And so we see here the central importance of leadership, and this was missing from the standards before. It was not clearly brought out, but in the 2015 revision, it's very clearly stated. Here are some of the requirements. Again, what we're going to do is we're going to highlight the shall statements. You'll see the shall statements in red and bold so that you understand what the exact requirements are. Anytime you see a shall statement, it is a specific requirement, and you can ask your organization, how are we doing this? So the first shall is that top management shall demonstrate leadership and commitment with respect to the environmental management system by doing a number of different activities. First of all, they have to take accountability for the effectiveness. This means that the environmental management system is linked not only to the core business strategy, but to environmental performance. This is a major change. Second, they ensure that the environmental policy and environmental objectives are established and are compatible with the strategic direction and the context of the organization. Again, linking the EMS back to the core business direction. The third, ensuring the integration of the environmental management system requirements into the organization's business processes. This is another emphasis on making the EMS a core part of how the organization functions, not just a bolt-on or an add-on. And this is another major change in the 2015. Leaders are required to make sure that there's enough resources so the EMS processes can function. And finally, they're also responsible for communicating the importance of effective environmental management and of conforming to the environmental management system requirements. And so they are the ones who set the tone and making sure that everyone follows the EMS. But again, the major change here is that the EMS is part of the core business. It's not just an add-on. Environmental commitments are serious, and it's part of the reason that the organization exists. But wait, there's more. Leaders are also responsible for making sure that the EMS achieves its intended outcomes, which means it achieves its objectives and goals. They're responsible for directing and supporting persons to contribute to the effectiveness of the environmental management system. This means that the people who are functioning in direct support of environmental performance as defined by the organization. And it's also the leaders are also responsible for promoting continual improvement and supporting other relevant management roles to demonstrate their leadership. Again, the business reference is it can be interpreted broadly to mean those activities that are core to the purpose of the organization's existence. The real key here is, again, that the EMS is a core part of how the organization functions, and that leaders are responsible for making sure that the systems are aligned, they have adequate resources, they're achieving what they're supposed to achieve, they've structured the system so that it is effective, and support other managers throughout the organization. Leaders also are responsible for developing policy. And the policy requirements in ISO 14001 are very clear. A policy is a set of prescribed and discretionary statements that both empower, limit, and prescribe actions of individuals. So they empower people to take action. They limit the action according to what the policy states. And they prescribe or provide normative guidelines for actions. There are a set of broad, precedent-setting decisions that guide or substitute for repetitive or time-sensitive decision-making. For example, if it's your organizational policy that everyone have unlimited vacation time, then you're not going to worry about when people take time off as long as they notify their managers. Again, if you have a policy that everyone has to show up at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, then you don't have to decide whether or not people are late because the people who come in at 8:01 are late. And so the policy takes the place of certain decisions because it provides criteria that the managers can follow. Again, policies empower or expand the discretion of managers in implementing strategies because they reflect the intention of those strategies as well as specific actions that support the strategies. And that policy helps managers achieve long-term goals and their mission when their policies are well stated and when they're aligned. Many organizations have misaligned policies. This is a very common occurrence as organizations become more complex. But when they're simple and straightforward and they follow certain guidelines, they can be extremely effective at helping people know what to do and helping managers know how to make decisions. In 14001, there are requirements for an environmental policy. So the requirements are that top management shall establish, implement, and maintain. There's 3 different verbs. They have to establish it, implement it, make it real, and maintain an environmental policy. And it has to have certain characteristics. It has to be appropriate to the purpose and context of the organization. That information was gathered before. including the nature, scale, and environmental impacts of its activities, products, and services. The policy has to provide a framework for setting environmental objectives. In other words, it can't be so vague that people don't know what to do and where to go, what path to take in order to achieve the policy commitments. The policy has to include a commitment to the protection of the environment, including prevention of pollution and other specific commitments that are relevant. Other commitments that are normally included and are found throughout a lot of environmental policies for protecting the environment can include things such as sustainable resource use, climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, and protection of biodiversity and protection of ecosystems. The idea is that this policy will fulfill these criteria. So we continue on. The policy also has to include a commitment to fulfill its compliance obligations. So there has to be a statement about complying to the various requirements that the organization has taken on itself, and also include a commitment to continual improvement of the environmental management system to enhance environmental performance. This is where we get back to the linkage. One of the weaknesses of the 2004 standard is that the policy must make a commitment about enhancing actual environmental performance. It can't just be systems that are better and better. The performance has to improve. The negative impacts have to be reduced, and the positive impacts have to be increased. So there's another set of shall statements in terms of logistics and establishing, implementing, and maintaining the policy. It has to be maintained as a documented information. So you can see a document or something electronic, perhaps. It has to be communicated within the organization. It has to be available to interested parties. So again, the organization needs to be able to state how these three requirements are being implemented. Roles and responsibilities are another leadership task. Leaders, when they align and develop the systems and processes for the EMS, have to make sure that the people running these systems and processes are adequately resourced, and that their roles and responsibilities are defined. It establishes, when you provide such a structure, it establishes accountability throughout the EMS. It supports roles and responsibilities when they're defined, can reflect a reporting structure for responsibilities, and also support a structure for action. They can define who can make what decisions and who can take what actions, and who owns the various EMS elements and processes, who's ultimately accountable for making sure these things run right. Again, the alignment function for leaders is important because defined roles and responsibilities align authority and responsibility. This is a major deal for many organizations because managers love to assign responsibility without authority. And when you have that, it's a recipe for disaster. Because you're responsible for something, but you have no authority to make changes or add resources or shift the integration of a particular process or system. And so roles and responsibilities can make sure that both of these are aligned, and that the EMS element and process owners have balanced authority and responsibility. And so the roles say who does what. They provide for how the activities are documented, and so when you implement a structure of defined roles and responsibilities, this is what you want to achieve. You don't want to say who does what, how they document it, how you tell them what to do, and then how you make sure that they do it. There's been a big change in the 2015 standard in that a specific management representative is not required. The reporting function is still there. In other words, top management or leadership has to understand what the outputs are from the EMS processes, how it's running, what the monitoring and measuring is saying, what the audits are saying. but the management representative role is not required. In other words, the specific gathering and amalgamation and transmission of the information can happen in many different ways. It can be one person, it can be a coordinator position, it can be a team of people. And so within the EMS, as long as the leaders say who does what, they tell the people how to document what they do, tell them that these are their responsibilities, and then make sure that they do it, the leadership role then has been fulfilled. The requirements of 14,001 are relatively straightforward. The top management, again, shall ensure that the responsibilities and authorities for relevant roles are assigned and communicated. So everyone has to know what their role is, and this has to be communicated to them. And there are two specific responsibilities within an EMS that are very important. First of all, the top management shall assign the responsibility and authority for making sure that the EMS conforms to the requirements of 14,001, that everything meets the standard. And second, the top management or the leaders have the responsibility. Well, they have to assign the responsibility and authority for reporting on the performance of the environmental management system to top management. Again, this used to be the management representative, but this is no longer required. It just has to be assigned. So the performance of the EMS, as evidenced from the documents emerging from operational processes and from measuring and monitoring and from audits and management reviews, have to make it to top management, and the leaders have to define how this is going to happen. Who is responsible? Who has the authority to make it happen? One way to do it is to provide a simple responsibility matrix. You can see this is relatively straightforward. You've got the what function that within the EMS, integrated EMS, is being carried out, the name of the person carrying it out, and then the title. Again, this is important to align job authorities and responsibilities with EMS processes. One of the ways to do it is to do it by clauses. This is another way of showing how the organization implements the 14,001 processes and who's responsible. The P means primary, the S means secondary, kind of backup. So we can take one for developing the environmental policy. We see that top management is primary with input from process owners. Identifying environmental aspects, the EMS coordinator is responsible, with the process owners providing some backup. Legal requirements are the primary responsibility of the system consultant, and so on. This is a nice way of presenting exactly who's responsible by title for making sure that the EMS is happening. And then it's the job of leadership to make sure that all of these people work together, they have the resources they need, and they're all communicating and talking with one another so that the EMS as a whole works properly. So that's it for this week's lecture. If you have any questions, just ask them in the instructor office threads or send me an email.